الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه وبعد. Okay. Continuing where we left off, today we're going to be speaking about um, the martyr who was killed and how his funeral prayer and how he's buried. And then we will talk about the one who dies during Hajj or in a state of Ihram, how we deal with them. And then visiting the graves, and then sending sending the reward of an action that we do to a dead person. These are, I think, the last four issues that are mentioned in the book of Janaiz. So Ibn Qudama says, وَالشَّهِيدُ إِذَا مَاتَ فِي الْمَعْرَكَةِ. So he begins this section with talking about the shaheed. And who is the shaheed? So he mentioned the shaheed, and he defines he defines who is the shaheed. He said, we're only talking about the shaheed of the ma'rak. We're only talking about the shaheed of the battlefield. And these rulings apply only to the shaheed of the battlefield, because there are in ahadith, Prophet mentioned certain other people who die in outside the battlefield were considered to be shaheed, like the one who dies by being crushed, or the one who dies by being stabbed, and others other than this, that they are shuhada, but they are not the shuhada of the battlefield. So in this section, when he mentions shuhada, it only applies to the martyr of the battlefield. And who is the martyr of the battlefield? It is the one who is killed in the battlefield the one who's killed in a battle between the Muslims and the disbelievers. So it's not anyone who dies in the battlefield, but he dies in a battle which is between the Muslims and the disbelievers, not in a battle between the Muslims and the Muslims, not in a battle between different groups of the Muslims, but between the Muslims and the disbelievers. And the shaheed is the one who fights and intends by his fighting. He fights in a war, in a battle, intends by his fighting to make Allah's word uppermost, or that he fights in the path of Allah, he fights in the war, in the battle that's going on, with the intention to repel the disbelievers from the Muslim lands. This is the shaheed of the battlefield. And he says, الشهيد إذا مات في المعركة لم يغسل ولم يصلى عليه وإنما يدفن في ثيابه ودمائه. He says that the shaheed who dies in the battlefield is not washed, and he's not prayed upon, and he is buried in his clothes with his blood. So he mentions that he's not washed, and there is no funeral prayer for him, and that he's buried, and that he's not shrouded in the shroud that we know, that we mentioned beforehand, but rather he's buried in the clothes that he died in, with the blood stains on it. And the proof for this is the hadith of Jabir, which is narrated by Al-Bukhari, where the Prophet ﷺ ordered that the martyrs of Uhud would be buried in their blood, and they will not be washed, and there is no funeral prayer to be prayed upon them. So this hadith is talking about what was the Prophet's command regarding the martyrs of the Battle of Uhud. And we know from them is Hamza, and we know where they are buried, and that they buried in the place where they died. and they were moved slightly, and then they were buried basically near Mount Uhud. That's where they died. That's where they were martyred. Also, he says that وَيُنَحَّ عَنْهُ الْحَدِيدُ وَالْجُلُودُ. But what is done is that any armor that they're wearing or any leather that is upon them, leather other than their clothes, is removed from them. So the armor and the leather was used to protect their body from the blows. So this is removed, and they're buried in their normal clothes, which even if they are stained with blood. So if they are, the explanation of this section is that the removal of armor or leather is that if he's wearing any protection, anything on top of his clothes as protection, or any weaponry, then all of that is removed from the body. But the clothes are not removed. So we leave him in his clothes. And that is this, the proof for this is what is narrated by Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhuma in Abu Dawood, and it's a Hasan hadith, which is a good hadith, an acceptable hadith, where he says that the Prophet ﷺ commanded concerning the martyrs of Uhud that their armor, the armor was to be removed, and that they were buried in their clothes, even if they were stained in blood. As we mentioned, this is mentioned in Abu Dawood, and hadith is good. We could ask, what is the wisdom behind this? What is the wisdom behind not washing them and not shrouding them in the way that is normal, but rather burying them in their clothes and not praying upon them? And we can derive, or we can deduce some benefits. As for leaving their blood, then this is an indication that the blood is pure, that their blood is pure, because we know there is it would seem that there is a consensus or a general agreement, or if not the majority, if not an agreement, that blood is impure. And this agreement or this majority opinion is from the time of the Salaf. Even though in modern days we have another opinion, and I think that opinion where the blood is pure has some scholars from the past as well, but it's more of a modern, has been more adopted by the modern ulama. And the classical opinion, which seems it's the vast majority of opinion, if not that there is an agreement. The agreement is differed upon, if there's an agreement, if there's a consensus or not. But the vast majority believe that blood is impure. So with regard to the blood of the shaheed, that his blood is pure. And because the washing is for removing of impurities. And because his blood is pure, there's no need for the washing of that impurity, because it's not impure. And because on the Day of Judgment, he will be resurrected with the blood flowing, and the blood pouring out of his wounds. And also, perhaps a wisdom is that because he will be resurrected in the way that he died, and that will be a witness for him on the Day of Judgment. As for not praying, then the prayer for the dead person is the purpose behind it is that we supplicate or make dua for them, that Allah forgives them their mistakes and overlooks their shortcomings and forgives them their sins. And it is said that the shaheed who was killed in the battlefield to make Allah's word uppermost, and died fighting in the path of Allah, then he is not in need of the people's supplication, because Allah has given him something greater than that, and that is shahada, that is martyrdom in Allah's path. And Allah has said, وَلَا تَحْسَبَنَّ الَّذِينَ قُتِلُوا فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ أَمْوَاتًا بَلْ أَحْيَاءٌ عِنْدَ رَبِّهِمْ يُرْزَقُونَ. That don't think that those who are killed in the path of Allah are dead. Rather, they are alive with the Lord being provided. And so this is another one of the wisdoms that the scholars have mentioned. Then Imam Ibn Qudama mentions, وَإِن كُفِنَ فِي غَيْرِ ثِيَابِهِ فَلَا بَأْسَ. There is one exception to those points that we have mentioned, and that is that if he is shrouded in other than the clothes that he's wearing, then that's acceptable as well. Okay, so that's acceptable as well. So some of the scholars have widened those who fall under this ruling, and they said because the Sharia or the Hadith have mentioned that there are other shuhada who are not shuhada of the ma'rakah, who are not shuhada of the battlefield, as the Prophet ﷺ said, the one that from the shuhada, from the martyrs, are the one who dies, fighting to protect his wealth, the one who dies fighting to protect his honor, the one who dies oppressed. But the correct opinion and the majority opinion is that, as Ibn Qudama mentioned, that these rulings that we mentioned about the funeral prayer is specific to the martyr of the battlefield. Okay. On that, is there any question? What we have covered just there, is there any question? Okay. From that, I'm assuming there's no question, so I'll carry on. Okay, so the only exception is that if he's buried in other than his clothes, then that's acceptable. Then he moves on to the next topic, which is Muhrim, the one who dies in the state of ihram. يغسل بماء وسدر ولا يلبس مخيطا ولا يقرب طيبا ولا يغطى رأسه ولا رجلاه ولا يقطع شعره ولا ظفره. Before we go to that, we want to mention one issue that is connected to the martyr that some of the scholars mentioned. What Ibn Qudama mentioned is the opinion of the Hanabila, or the Mu'tamad, the madhab stance of the Hanabila. But there is another opinion within the madhab and within some of the other scholars, and that is that the prayer there is a funeral prayer prayed for the martyr of the battlefield, and this opinion is an opinion of Imam Ahmad, and the proof for this opinion, or this view, is the hadith which is related by Uqba ibn Amir that the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam خرج يوما فصلى على أهل أحد صلاته على الميت ثم انصرف. That one day the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam went out and he prayed the funeral prayer that he would normally pray on a dead body for the people of Uhud, the martyrs of Uhud. Then he left. And this hadith is mentioned in Bukhari and Muslim. And this is a proof that it's possible or it's allowable for one to pray a funeral prayer for the martyr of the battlefield, the same prayer as is done on any other person who dies. However, in some narrations, some versions of this narration, it's mentioned that the Prophet ﷺ prayed this prayer and he went out to pray this prayer later, at a later stage. And some narrations state that it was just before he died, sallallahu in the 10th year, whereas the Battle of Uhud, was in the 2nd year of Hijrah. The Prophet ﷺ delayed that prayer for 8 years. Okay, so the Prophet ﷺ didn't pray as soon as they died, even though the normal situation is that the funeral prayer of dead people is done as soon as they die, as soon as they're ready to be buried, and it's done before they're buried. But here the Prophet ﷺ delayed it. And then the Hanabila and those who hold that you shouldn't pray there's no funeral prayer for the shuhada, for the martyrs of the battlefield, is that what the Prophet ﷺ intended by this prayer was to pray for them, to make dua for them at the end of his life. So we go by in our study, we're going to stick to the madhab, which is that there is no funeral prayer for the martyr of the battlefield. Is that clear? Okay, is that point clear? That there is a difference of opinion here. And even within the madhab, there is a difference of opinion. But the madhab opinion, that which the madhab has been formulated upon and agreed upon, is that there is none. Okay, good. All right, so let's move on to the Muhrim. Al-Muhrim, the Muhrim is the one who dies in the state of Ihram, so either for Hajj or for Umrah. If he dies in that state, then that state remains connected to him, and he remains in that state. And as you know, there are certain things that are forbidden for him in that state, or for her in that state. One of them is the cutting of hair, or the cutting of nails, perfuming the body, wearing normal clothing, except for the woman can wear normal clothing, but for the man, wearing clothing which is on the shape of the body. And we call that makhitan. Makhitan literally means that which is stitched. But it's not meaning stitched in the sense that there are stitches in it, because all clothes are stitched, all cloth is stitched. But what is meant by makhit is that it is not stitched on the shape of a bodily organ. So it's not stitched on the shape of the chest and the arms or the legs. It's not stitched in that. That's what we mean by makhit. That's what we mean by stitched. Not that it has stitching in it, because all cloth has stitching in it. That's how it's made. So the muhrim, if he dies in the state of ihram, then that state remains with him. So the state of ihram remains after his death. The ruling of that state remains after his death. So he is dealt with, his body is dealt with as if it is in the state of ihram. It is washed. It is washed with water and sidr, those leaves, crushed up those leaves, and they become powder, and they wash it like we mentioned before. He's washed with that and the same washing that occurs, but when it comes to perfuming the body, then no perfuming is used. And also, when we shroud him with his ihram, and we do not cover his head, because covering the head for the male in ihram is not allowed. As for the female, then her head is covered. And also his hair and his nails are not cut, as we mentioned, that if there is a need to cut the dead body's hair or nails, especially the nails, then that is done. But for the person who dies in ihram, that is from the mahdurat, from the prohibited matters in ihram, so that is not done. And the basis of this is the hadith of Ibn Abbas, where he mentions the story of the man who was in a state of ihram, and he was on his camel mount, and the camel knocked him off the mount, and he fell on his head or neck, broke his neck, and died. So his head is not covered, because he will be resurrected on the Day of Judgment saying the talbiyah. Talbiyah, does anybody know what the talbiyah is? Does anybody know what the talbiyah is? When we say he'll be resurrected saying the talbiyah, what is the talbiyah? Good. Labbaik. Labbaik Allahumma labbaik. Labbaik la sharika lak labbaik. Inna alhamda wa ni'mata laka wal mulk la sharika lak. This is the talbiyah of Hajj and the talbiyah of Umrah. So he will be resurrected saying that talbiyah. And that talbiyah and that state that he's resurrected in will be a witness for him on the Day of Judgment. Just like the blood that pours out of the martyr when he is resurrected is a witness for him on the Day of Judgment in front of Allah. Then Ibn Qudama moves on to another topic, which is what type of grave should be dug. And he says, وَيُسْتَحَبُّ الدَّفْنُ الْمَيِّتِ فِي اللَّحْدِ وَيُنْصَبْ عَلَيْهِ اللَّبِنُ نصبا كما فعل برسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم ولا يدخل القبر آجر ولا خشبا ولا شيئا مسته النار. So he says that it's recommended that the dead body is buried, or the grave is a grave which is considered to be the grave of a lahd. And the lahd is that it's dug down, and then like a niche, it's dug down, and then a little bit of it is dug to the side. And that's enough, that side digging, so down and then side bit, and that side part is enough to place the dead body in it. And then once the person has been placed in that niche there, or that side bit, then bricks are placed on the opening of that. So the person is put inside that, and then bricks are placed to close the opening. And then we place the dirt upon the middle the main hole. In that way, we're not placing any dirt or any of the earth upon the body of the dead person, but rather we're placing him into this cavity that we've made, this niche that we've made. And then we're closing it up, and then we're pouring the dirt upon the hole that we created to get down to that cavity. Is that understood? That is what we call lahad. Is that understood? So it's not like we make the grave, dig the grave and just place him at the bottom. No. The lahad is that we make a section on the side enough, big enough and wide enough to be able to place the body in there. And then we close that up with bricks, that opening up by bricks, and then we place the dirt on top in the hole that we made. Is that clear? Just put up your hand if that's clear. If that's not, then I'll try and explain it again. Okay, I'm going to assume that that's clear. All right, so continuing. Okay. That's yeah. So that's a lahad, and that is what is still used in Medina al-Munawwara, in al-Baqi', and I think even in Mecca is used, the lahad. And that's how the Prophet ﷺ was buried. And then he mentions وَلَا يُدْخَلُ الْقَبْرُ آجُرٌ, that you do not put the bricks that you use to close up that cavity, you do not use the bricks made that were cooked in fire, nor wood, nor anything that fire had touched. And the purpose of that is because in hope that nothing of the fire will touch. So it's tafa'ulan, it's optimism, being optimistic that in this way no fire will have touched him. So we're hoping through that, we're hoping in that way, not through that, we're hoping in that way that no fire will touch him. This is called tafa'ulan. And the Prophet ﷺ loved tafa'ul. He loved being optimistic, doing things that would indicate, or that would show, or that would help people to be optimistic. Then he moves on to another topic. ويستحب تعزية أهل البيت والبكاء غير مكروه إذا لم يكن معه ندب ولا نياحة. It's recommended to give condolences to the people, the family of the dead person, and it's acceptable for one to cry, as long as it's not a disliked or a crying that goes overboard, where there is wailing and shouting. And ta'ziyah, condolences, is a sunnah, and it's legislated, and it's for the benefit of the dead person, because in it there is some dua, and there is consoling the people who have been burdened by his death, who have been, a fitna has, a trial has affected them by their death, and through the condolences, the Muslims get closer and they feel that they are connected to each other. And as for the wailing, then it comes in the hadith that the Prophet ﷺ entered upon Sa'ad ibn Ubadah, فوجده في غاشية فبكى. The Prophet ﷺ entered upon Sa'ad ibn Ubadah, and he found him that he was in the last stages of life, and the Prophet ﷺ cried, or he shed tears. And the companions cried with him, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And then he said, do you not hear that verily Allah doesn't punish due to the shedding of tears, nor due to the grief of the heart, but he punishes by this, and he pointed to his tongue. And what is meant by pointing to the tongue is by screaming and shouting. This is what is prohibited, and this is what one will be punished for. So what is allowable is crying, but not going overboard. Because shedding tears, one sometimes has no control over them. When something difficult happens and someone sheds tears and one feels grief in their heart and the heart feels heavy, then the person doesn't have control over that. But wailing and shouting and cursing and beating oneself and ripping one's clothes, all of this shows that one is angry, one is displeased with Allah's qadr. And this is what is not allowed. And the Prophet ﷺ said, لَيْسَ مِنَّا مَنْ ضَرَبَ الْخُدُودِ وَشَقَّ الْجُيُوبِ وَدَعَى بِدَعْوَى الْجَاهِلِيَّةِ. That he is not from us who at this time of calamity, he strikes his cheeks and he rips his clothes and he screams the screams of Jahiliyyah. And he says words of Jahiliyyah. The hadith is mentioned in Bukhari and Muslim. And then he moves on. Okay, is there any questions on anything we've covered so far? Because it's going to move on to the last topic. Any questions so far? Okay, I'll take that as a no, and I'll carry on. Then he moves on to the ruling on visiting graves. So he says, rahimahullah, وَلَا بَأْسَ بِزِيَارَةِ الْقُبُورِ لِلرِّجَالِ. So he says it's acceptable and there's no problem with visiting the graves for the men. So this shows that he confined the ruling of allowable to men. And so it's allowable for men. As for women, then there is a famous difference of opinion whether women are allowed to visit the graves or not. The opinion of the Hanabila and the position of the madhab is that women are not allowed, and are prohibited from visiting the graves. Based upon the statement, the basement of the statement of the Prophet ﷺ, كنت قد نهيتكم عن زيارة القبور. This is to do with allowance of the men. كنت قد نهيتكم عن زيارة القبور فزوروها فإنها تذكركم الموت. I had before prohibited you from visiting the grave. So visit them, but indeed they remind you of death. As for the women being prohibited, then there's the narration, لعن الله زوارات القبور والمتخذين عليها مساجد والسراج. That Allah has cursed the females who visit the grave, zawarat. The females who often visit the graves, and those who take the graveyards as places of worship, and those who light candles or put lights on the graves. And there's other narrations in which the women were prohibited from visiting the graves. So these are the proofs of the Hanabila, and this is the opinion of the Hanabila. As for what one does when one visits the graves, then this is mentioned to us in the hadith of Muslim. كان رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يعلمهم إذا خرجوا إلى المقابر أن يقول قائلهم السلام عليكم أهل الديار من المؤمنين والمسلمين وإنا إن شاء الله بكم لاحقون نسأل الله العظيم لنا ولكم العافية. So the Prophet ﷺ used to teach the companions that if they went out to the graveyard, that they should say Assalamu alaikum ahl al-diyar min al-mu'minin wal-muslimin. Peace be upon you, O people of the graveyard, from the believers and from the Muslims. And wa inna insha'Allah bikum lahikun. And verily, if Allah wills, or when Allah wills, we will catch you up. We will reach you. We ask Allah, the Supreme, for us and for you pardon. And it's known as dua of visiting the graves. Once Umar radiallahu anh, coming back to the women, saw a woman following the janazah, and he forbade her from that and warned her against doing that, following the grave. And it is said that the wisdom behind that is that the woman's emotions take over, and the woman in calamities is weak because of her emotions, and she is prone to go overboard and not have patience, especially when she sees it. And she may, due to the overpowering of her emotions, she may do actions and say statements that are not allowed statements, and actions that show displeasure and show craziness and show shouting and screaming. And that could happen following the grave, and that can happen visiting the graveyard. Then he mentions the last issue, which is that any وَأَيُّ قُرْبَةٍ فَعَلَهَا وَجَعَلَ ثَوَابُهَا لِلْمَيِّتِ الْمُسْلِمِ نَفَعَهُ ذَلِكَ. Ibn Qudama says that any act of worship or act of seeking closeness to Allah and gaining reward, any action, any good deed, basically qurbah is any good deed that a person does, intending that the reward of it goes to the dead person, then that will benefit that dead person, the dead Muslim. And this is a big issue of contention between the scholars. This is a very big issue of contention between the scholars, and we have very varying opinions. And I think the two major opinions is that any action can be done and the reward can be given to intending the reward for the dead person, or the other opinion, which is that only those actions and those rewardful deeds which have been mentioned in the text, either in the Quran or the Hadith, that can be given and the Prophet approved of them, then and only those can be done for the dead person and the reward given to the dead person. As for other than that, then that's not allowed. These are the two major opinions on this. And both sides and all the opinions have proofs for what they hold. But this is not an issue that we can cover in or we should cover in the matters of fiqh. This is more to do with aqidah and would be covered there. Can one make dua for the dead person at the graveyard? Yes, one can make dua. This is not mentioned there. This is what I'm saying. If I'm saying this in addition to what Ibn Qudama mentioned, that dua can be made for the dead person. The dua to Allah can be made for the dead person at the dead person's grave, as long as the dua is made to Allah for that dead person and not the dua, not making dua to the dead person. This is not allowed, and this is shirk, and this leads one to leave the fold of Islam. But dua can be made for the dead person at his grave. Dua to Allah can be made for the dead person at his grave. It can be made individually, and it can be made in congregation. And there's narrations from the Prophet ﷺ that he ordered for dua to be made after he buried one of the companions. And this has been the practice of the Salaf as well, making dua at the grave after burying the dead person. And this is something allowed unless it leads people to make dua to the dead person, or it may, or if it indicates that the person or that it becomes a stepping stone to shirk, then it would be prohibited from the angle that is a stepping stone to shirk, making dua to the dead person. But if that's all warded off and that is not the case, then it's acceptable and allowable for one to make dua for the dead person at his grave or at her grave. Allah knows best. Are women allowed to visit the grave site after the funeral, many months after? According to the Hanabila, no. According to the Hanabila, no. They're not allowed ever to visit the graveyard or visit the grave of anyone. That's the madhab of the Hanabila. As for the majority opinion of the madhahib, that it's allowable. The Hanafiya, the Malikiya, and the Shafi'iyya, they all allow it. To various degrees, they allow them to visit, and they say as long as there's no prohibited actions done. But the opinion of the Hanabila, and that's what is still done by the Hanabila, like in Saudi, in the Gulf states, is that women are prohibited from visiting the graves, even the grave of their husband, or the grave of their father, or of their brother. They're prohibited from it. Okay, with that was the last issue mentioned by Ibn Qudama in the book of Janaiz. And with that, we've finished the book of Janaiz. So this would be our last lesson. And next week there is no Fiqh of Janaiz lesson. So we finished the book of Janaiz. Are there any questions, clarifications, any issues before we close this series of lectures? Or are there any requests? Okay. All right. We will. Oh, something's come up. Check. Okay, that's fine. May Allah reward you for taking your time out and watching and listening and learning. And I would advise you to go over these lessons again, and so you can internalize and you can memorize what needs to be learned, and so you don't have to, so you don't forget, because it's very easy for us to forget. Ameen. Yes, Ameen. Okay. All right. Jazakumullah khaira. Wa sallallahu ala nabi Muhammad. And I will see those of you who attend the class on Thursday, bi'idhnillah. Wa sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammad. Allahu a'lam.